She was 19 years old, quiet by nature and careful about the world. Her parents had always told her that home was the one place she never had to worry. Home was the place where nothing bad could reach her. They meant every word of it. They believed every word of it. And for 19 years, Yasmin Garrett believed it too. But the night her parents drove out of that driveway and the headlights disappeared around the corner, the danger that would change her life forever was not lurking somewhere outside those walls. It was already sitting in her living room. It had a name. It smiled at her, and it called itself family.
Before we begin, let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Would love to hear from you, and your support helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.
Yasmin Garrett grew up in a mid-sized town in the American South, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors and front porches still get used. She was the only child of Earl and Gloria Garrett, two people who had built their entire lives around one goal: giving their daughter a better life than they'd had. Earl worked long shifts at a logistics warehouse on the edge of town. Gloria balanced two part-time jobs and still had dinner on the table most nights by 6. They were not wealthy people, but they were intentional people. They paid attention to everything that moved in and around their daughter's life. Yasmin had grown up introverted and thoughtful, the kind of young woman who preferred reading in her room to parties on the weekend. She was one semester into a nursing program at the local community college. She was organized, focused, and deeply close to her mother. Their relationship was the kind that other people noticed, the way Yasmin would call Gloria just to talk, the way Gloria always seemed to know when something was wrong before Yasmin said a word. They were each other's compass. The Garretts ran a tight household. No male visitors when the parents weren't home. A curfew that Yasmin respected without argument. These rules were never about control. They were about protection. Earl and Gloria had seen enough of the world to know that not everyone who smiled at their daughter had her best interests in mind. They screened the people in their lives carefully. They trusted slowly. And the people they had chosen to trust most, aside from each other, were family. Her home was supposed to be the safest place in the world. That was the whole point. That was the promise. In the spring of that year, Earl received a call that no one wants to get. His mother, Yasmin's grandmother, had been hospitalized several states away. The situation was serious enough that both Earl and Gloria needed to go. It was not a question of whether they would leave. The only question was who would stay with Yasmin.
She was 19, technically an adult, but Earl and Gloria were not the kind of parents who left things to chance. Their house sat at the end of a long, poorly lit road, and the neighborhood, while familiar, was not without its problems. They wanted someone they knew, someone they trusted, someone who already felt like a natural part of their family structure. The answer came quickly. Earl had two brothers, Derek and Mervyn Garrett, who both lived within 40 minutes of the house. Derek, the older of the two, was a deacon at his church. Mervyn had known Yasmin since she was born. These were men who had been at every Christmas dinner, every birthday cookout. They were not strangers wearing the face of family. They were family, or so Earl and Gloria believed with everything they had. The plan was settled. Derek and Mervyn would take shifts staying at the house. Earl and Gloria would be gone no more than 4 or 5 days. Yasmin hugged her mother at the door, told her not to worry, and watched the car pull away. Something shifted in the air the moment those taillights disappeared. She couldn't name it. She told herself she was just being emotional. They're family, she thought to herself, closing the front door. It's fine.
The first evening was quiet enough. Derek arrived with a bag and a familiar ease, moving through the house the way someone does when they've been there many times before. He made a comment about how Yasmin had grown up, but something about the way he said it sat wrong. It wasn't the words exactly. It was the way he looked at her while he said them. A half second too long, a slight pause where there shouldn't have been one. Yasmin shook it off. She was probably overthinking. She went to her room early, told him she had studying to do, and kept the door shut. Mervyn arrived the next afternoon. He was louder than Derek, more familiar in the way he moved through the space, more comfortable making himself at home. He asked questions that felt personal in a way she couldn't quite explain. What time she usually went to sleep, whether she ever had friends over, whether she stayed up late. Each question by itself seemed harmless, but together they built a picture she didn't like. She told herself she was reading into things. She answered as little as possible and went back to her textbooks. There was something in the way they looked at her, something she couldn't explain but couldn't entirely ignore either. A heaviness, a quiet awareness that she was being watched, even when no one was obviously watching. She had grown up in a house full of love and structure, and this feeling was the opposite of both. She started locking her bedroom door at night. She started keeping her phone close. She told herself this was just the discomfort of having people in her space. She told herself a lot of things that week.
By the second night, Yasmin had rearranged her entire routine to avoid being alone in a room with either of them. She ate earlier than usual, cleaned up quickly, and retreated before the evening could stretch into something uncomfortable. She studied with headphones in even when she wasn't listening to anything. She created a wall of routine and normalcy to hide behind, hoping it would be enough to get her through the next few days until her parents came home. But the house worked against her. It was her home, every hallway familiar, every door known, and yet it started to feel like a place she didn't recognize anymore. Small things began to shift. A sound outside her bedroom door late at night, a shadow underneath it that lingered a moment too long before moving away, the feeling of someone pausing outside her room, standing there in the dark, then slowly walking away. She lay still in her bed those nights, barely breathing, telling herself it was nothing, convincing herself, then reconvincing herself. She thought about calling her mother. She picked up the phone twice. Both times, she put it back down. What would she even say? That she felt uncomfortable? That something felt off? Her parents were hours away, sitting at a hospital bedside. She didn't want to add to their burden with what felt like instinct she couldn't prove. She decided she would hold on. Just a few more days. She could do that. She was strong. She would be fine. Can I ask you something? If you had felt something was wrong, truly wrong, but you couldn't explain it, couldn't point to anything specific, what would you have done? Would you have made that call, or would you have talked yourself out of it the same way Yasmin did?
It happened on the third night. Yasmin had gone to bed at her usual time, done everything the same way she always did, changed, locked the door, set her phone face up on the nightstand. She had almost convinced herself that the worst was over, that she had overreacted, that in a day or two her parents would be home and this chapter would close without incident. She was wrong. She woke to a sound at her door, not a knock, something quieter, the sound of the lock being tested, a slow, deliberate pressure against the handle, and then, softly, the door opened. She had locked it. She was certain she had locked it, but locks in old houses sometimes give, and she had never thought until that moment to check whether anyone in that house had a spare key. What happened next, Yasmin would spend years learning how to talk about. In the days and weeks that followed, she would describe the experience not as something she could fully put into words, but as a line, a clear and permanent line between who she was before that night and who she had to become after it. The fear, the paralysis, the terrible helplessness of realizing that the people her parents had trusted the most were the very people she had needed protection from. In that moment, Yasmin understood something that no one should ever have to learn inside their own home. Family is not a guarantee of safety. A name you've known your whole life is not the same thing as trustworthiness. And sometimes the people placed closest to you are placed there not to protect you, but because proximity made you easier to reach. Stories like this one are painful to sit with, but they matter because awareness is one of the only tools we have. If you believe more people need to hear this story, take 1 second and hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it helps this video reach someone who might need it. Before we go on, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. The days after were a study in silence. Yasmin moved through the remainder of that week like someone performing the motions of a life she no longer fully occupied. She made coffee. She opened her textbooks. She answered her mother's check-in texts with single words, fine, okay, yes. She had learned in the space of one night how to wear a mask so convincing that even the people who loved her couldn't see through it. When Earl and Gloria returned home, they found the house clean and their daughter sitting at the kitchen table. Yasmin smiled. She said she was glad they were back. She said everything had been fine. And in the hours and days that followed, she said nothing else. Not because she didn't want to, but because the questions piling up inside her were terrifying. What if they don't believe me? What if they blame me? What if telling them breaks something in this family that can never be put back together? What if I'm the one who ends up alone at the end of this? This is the part of these stories that people outside them rarely understand. The silence after abuse is not weakness. It is not indifference. It is a survival calculation made in a moment of complete vulnerability, a decision about which risk is safer, telling or staying quiet. Research consistently shows that survivors of family-based abuse frequently delay disclosure for months or even years, not because the abuse didn't happen, but because the emotional cost of being disbelieved by the people they love most feels unsurvivable. Yasmin withdrew from her friends. She stopped answering calls from people she used to talk to every week. She stopped studying at the pace she had set for herself. Sleep became something that happened to her in short, restless intervals, rather than something she could seek and find. She sat with a weight that had no name she was ready to give it. Not yet. It was Gloria who noticed first. Not because Yasmin said anything, she was still saying nothing, but because a mother who has spent 19 years reading her daughter's face does not need words. Something was wrong. The eyes that had always met hers directly were now aimed somewhere past her shoulder. The voice that had always carried warmth had gone flat in a way that Gloria could not explain but could not ignore either. She asked Yasmin quietly if something had happened while they were gone. The question came gently, without pressure. Yasmin's first response was no. Her second was silence. And her third, the one that came after a long pause in which Gloria simply stayed in the room and waited without filling the space, was a slow, quiet crumbling. Not dramatic, not loud, just a young woman's face finally letting go of the weight it had been holding up by sheer force of will. The words came out broken and out of order, but Gloria understood every one of them. The hours that followed were some of the hardest of the Garrett family's life. Earl's reaction was the one Yasmin had feared, not disbelief exactly, but a visible struggle to absorb what he was being told about his own brothers. These were men he had grown up with, men he had trusted without reservation. The idea that they had done this inside his house, to his daughter, was a fact his mind had to work to accept in real time. And for a moment, that struggle looked like doubt. Yasmin saw it. She had been afraid of exactly that look, but Gloria did not waver. She held her daughter's hand across the table and said, firmly and without room for interpretation, "I believe you. We believe you." It was the moment that changed everything, because once those words were spoken, the path forward, however hard, became possible. The family contacted authorities within days. Cases of this nature are among the most difficult in the legal system, not because the truth is unclear, but because the structural closeness of the people involved makes every step of the process harder. Investigators noted behavioral details Yasmin was able to provide, as well as physical and circumstantial evidence from the house. Both Derek and Mervyn Garrett were questioned. The investigation moved forward. Research consistently shows that in cases of intrafamilial abuse, the path to accountability is long and emotionally brutal for survivors and the non-offending family members who stand beside them. Extended family fractures, friends choose sides, and the survivor, who has already endured the original wound, is asked to relive it again and again, in interviews, in documentation, sometimes in courtrooms. Yasmin would go through all of it, and she would not go through any of it alone. Gloria became her daughter's constant. Earl, once he had fully absorbed the truth and let it settle into something he was willing to act on, became her advocate in every room he entered. Both men, Derek and Mervyn Garrett, were removed from the family. The community was smaller after that, quieter, but it was safer. And safety, once lost, becomes the only thing that truly matters. Yasmin Garrett eventually returned to a nursing program. It took longer than she had originally planned. There were hard days, sessions with a counselor she slowly learned to trust, nights that were still difficult, mornings that required more effort than they used to. But she went back. She finished. And the career she had chosen before any of this happened, a career built around caring for people in their most vulnerable moments, turned out to be the place where she found the most consistent sense of purpose. She has never described what happened to her as something that defines her. She describes it as something that happened to her. There is a difference, and she insists on it. The scar is real, the healing is real, and the person she became on the other side of it is someone her mother recognizes completely, maybe even more clearly than before. Yasmin survived. But the scars of betrayal do not simply disappear, they reshape you. They change what you trust and how you trust it. They make you more careful with your own heart in ways that are sometimes a gift and sometimes a grief. And sometimes they make you want to tell your story, because telling it means someone else's daughter might be a little less alone the next time she needs the words. Sometimes the people meant to protect us are the ones we need protection from. That truth is one of the hardest things a family can face, and yet families face it and survive it every single day. According to national research, nearly 90% of survivors of intrafamilial abuse are harmed by someone they already know and trust. A significant portion of cases involve extended family members, uncles, cousins, grandparents, people who have been given access precisely because they are considered safe. The grooming process in these cases often happens slowly and invisibly through the ordinary routines of family life, which is why the warning signs can be so difficult to name in the moment. If you are a parent, speak openly with your children, regardless of age, about body autonomy, about the difference between discomfort and fear, and about the fact that trust is something earned, not assumed, even within a family. If you are a young person and something feels wrong, believe that feeling. You do not need proof before you speak. You only need one person willing to listen. Find that person. If you or someone you know has experienced this kind of abuse, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-422-4453. You can also reach RAIN's National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673. You are not alone. You are believed, and help exists. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel something, made you want to hold someone you love a little tighter tonight, please subscribe to this channel. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep telling these stories, because awareness is the beginning of everything. And tell me in the comments, could you have seen the signs? What would you have done if you were Yasmin? What would you have done if you were Gloria? I want to hear your thoughts, every single one.